Hello, everyone. I'm Kelly McNeil, Senior Learning Experience Designer at Digital Promise, also joined by my amazing team supporting the AI Education Exchange behind the scenes, Jasmine, Nick, Amanda, and Rebecca. Welcome to our first ever AI Education Exchange Communities Ask Me Anything series, powered by HP and Digital Promise, featuring pioneers at the forefront of AI in education. Over the next 6 months, we have an amazing lineup of prominent experts in the AI and education field. In these interactive Q&A format sessions, you'll have the opportunity to ask industry leaders any question on your mind related to AI in education, from insights on impacts in education to real-world classroom applications and future trends in educational technology. We invite you to join us for these unscripted, authentic conversations by submitting your questions in advance through the registration on LinkedIn or live during the session. Today's questions have been sourced ahead of time from our educator community who submitted their questions through our LinkedIn community, the AI Education Exchange, and other social media platforms. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce our esteemed guest for today's Ask Me Anything. I first learned about his work while studying at Arizona State University, and I have referenced the TPACK framework often. When he agreed to be our honored speaker today, I couldn't have been more excited. So please welcome Dr. Punya Mishra.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and the great ASU connection, of course, very important.
Awesome. Well, let's get started. Dr. Mishra, if you would go ahead and we'd love to hear a little more about you. Just tell us a little bit about yourself,
Sure.
if you would.
So,
Introduce yourself for us.
of course, thank you. So, I'm currently director of innovative learning futures in the Learning Engineering Institute at Arizona State University. I'm also a professor at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. Another way of thinking about it, I'm a failed engineer, a failed filmmaker, a somewhat successful educator, researcher. But the way I liked, I'm interested in a lot of different. So I always say that, there's the great Douglas Adams book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and one of the other books he has is called Life, the Universe, and Everything. So I always joke that that's my description, is that I'm interested in life, the universe, and everything. But I think if one way I'd like to call myself is that of an educational designer, because I look at education or the world around me through the lens of design. And what that means is that almost everything we have in the world around us, what we are doing now, the walls that the clothes we wear, the Carnegie unit, the schools that we have designed, all of those things are sort of created by us. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes due to the legacy of history. But what the design lens then tells us is that we can actually always make it better, right? That whatever we have. And so that lens is so, if I have to describe myself, it would be broadly as an educational designer. I dabble in a lot of different things, but it's always with that lens in mind. And then you had asked me for like a little interesting or fun fact. So here is one that I'm not sure many academics would have. I have an IMDb profile, not because I acted in any film or anything, but I do these kinds of visual wordplay, which I think they're going to drop into the chat. And so this was one where you can read the word good and evil both, depending on what you focus on. And the TV show Brain Games got in touch with me, and they wanted to use it for one of their episodes as an example of like how our brain makes sense of the world. And one day I got an email from a friend saying, "Did you know you had an IMDb profile?" And that's how I ended up there. So that's like a little fun fact about things you dabble in end up somewhere else altogether and becomes a fun little nugget to share.
I love that. To be honest with you, I think I saw that episode of Brain Games that
That's
had that
funny.
wordplay. I think I saw that. I also saw in one of your recent blog posts where you were doing sketch notes and you
Mhm.
did the same sort of play on words with two words in one word. I loved reading that. So thank you
Yeah,
for sharing that.
it's just a lot of, I think I always joke that if I had gone to school in the US, I grew up in India and went to school there, they'd have put me on drugs because I'm always like so fidgety. I have to do like 10 different, I have like a Rubik cube here, I have like 30 different toys to keep me focused. But yeah, I love dabbling with visuals and images and things that way. So yeah, just fun.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Well, before we fully dive into all of our community questions and into this AI integration, and I've already mentioned TPACK and hinted at that once, our audience here, perhaps not everyone is actually familiar with TPACK. So, can you unpack TPACK for us a little bit? Kind of just give us a brief.
Sure, sure. Well, thank you for that. So, the TPAC framework actually, this is what is kind of interesting is like good educators have always understood it, right? And so, when you so the origin of the framework, it's a framework of teacher knowledge for technology integration. Like, what is it that educators need to know to successfully or intelligently integrate technology in their teaching? It builds on work by Lee Schulman, who was sort of the first person to really say that educators have a special kind of knowledge. So it is the knowledge, we all know professors who might be really good at, let's say, math or music but cannot teach it. So what he called pedagogical content knowledge was this knowledge of not just the subject matter, not just of general pedagogical techniques, but of the intersection between them. That teaching math requires a special kind of knowledge which is different than teaching music or teaching art or teaching history, which requires you understanding the student, understanding the kinds of problems they might face, so on and so forth. When Matt Kaler and I, who sort of co-developed the TPAC framework, this is like early 2000s when the internet was just, sort of picking up, and this whole discussion of how we can integrate technology came up. In our research, what we found is that educators who were doing it well understood that technology was as important a mix in that picture. And so as an educator wanting to integrate technology, you have to think not just of the content that you have to teach, but the pedagogical approach that you need to have. And that technology was a critical component there, because if you want, for instance, kids to learn the names of the 50 states and their capitals, the kind of technology you would use would be something like a digital flashcard. But if you want them to become better writers, then maybe something like a shared wiki where they can comment on each other's posts or write publicly on a blog becomes a better technology. So at some level, the TPAC framework is pretty common sense. But I think what we did was sort of give it some kind of an analytic frame so that then you could use it for teacher professional development, you could use it for teacher education. And Matt and I sort of marvel about this, that we used to sit on the fifth floor of this building, Erickson Hall in East Lansing, Michigan, bouncing these ideas around. And lo and behold, it is something that is being used across the world today. So that is very humbling and very wonderful to have that. At the same time, it is also interesting that I am known for creating a Venn diagram, which is also kind of humbling in its own way.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm very familiar with that Venn diagram and I like it. It's very simple. I think it very, in a picture shows exactly what that framework
Yeah,
is.
I
So
think what it got right was the right balance between simplicity but opening it up to complexity, so that you can enter that and then you can start having really interesting dialogues and questions, whether as within yourself or within a team. As you sort of think about how one can best use this technology, or any technology for that matter.
yeah, for sure. And just speaking about complexity and any technology, when you were 20 years ago writing this, I'm sure you maybe weren't thinking about where we are today. So, again, we've got some questions, but another like sort of just introductory question before we jump into this. What is this thing
Okay.
called generative AI and how is it different from all these other technologies?
Thank you for that. So I think if you look at the history of artificial intelligence, the big movement till very recently had been top down, which is like we understand that humans have concepts and they are connected with each other. Experts have a certain kind of way the knowledge is sort of built, that they have formed conceptual structures in their head. And the way was, how do we replicate that? Now, what you have is, again, with the advent of the internet, a lot of the things that we do are now digitized. There are books, there are blog posts, there are Reddit posts. We are contributing to it all the time. This being an example of things that are now existing in the digital ecosphere. What is new about this generative AI technology is that it is not top down, that it is almost bottom up. So you have these algorithms that take all the stuff, right, that has been digitized and start seeing patterns among them. And as the sort of length of the tokens and the kinds of things that we could start connecting together grew and grew, suddenly these technology started behaving in ways that were not predicted even by the people who were designing these technologies, that it could start writing code. Not great code in the beginning, but it could do that. It learned to translate between languages. So I think the important couple of things to understand about this technology, that a, it's not top down, that it is built on the stuff that we have put out there in the world, the good, the bad, the indifferent, the horrible, right? And maybe some of the greatest creations of human mind, whether it's Mozart's symphony or Einstein's equations or Picasso's paintings, as well as the tripe and absolute rubbish that can exist in this world, right? So it's all of the above sort of mangled together. Now they build these reinforcement systems which try to guardrail against some of the worst excesses that are there. So if people have to think about a few things that they need to remember and understand about this technology, first, it is generative, which means before, when you query a database, you ask a question, it goes, looks up the answer and gives it to you. There is no answer that this large language model looks up. It actually generates the answer every time you ask a question from bottom up. A consequence of that is variability. So you could ask the same question multiple times, you're going to get slightly different answers. That's really important to understand. That's what actually makes it really interesting to chat with, because it's not predictable, because it's always doing something else. Conversations meander in ways that they would naturally do. Third, it's multimodal. What that means is that because it's just looking at ones and zeros, it doesn't care if the ones and zeros are related to words or images or video. So that's why you can have this image generation. That's why you can have video generation. You can also have text, so on and so forth. Third, and I think this is the one that's really important, it is dialogic and conversational, which means that one can engage in a conversation with it, right? So you can ask it questions, they'll reply back, you can push back, remembering all the time that it is generative, it's making stuff up. So when people say, oh, can we get rid of hallucinations? My response is, this technology is a hallucination. Sometimes, or many times, its hallucinations align with what we think, or what we think about, like whatever topic that we are asking about. Then we say, oh, it got it right. But actually, it made it up out of whole cloth. Even in that instance, the times when it doesn't match what we think is right, we say, oh, it hallucinated. Actually, it's always hallucinating. So to sum that up, the way I look at generative AI, as far as I'm concerned, and this is, if you want to take away one thing from this, take this away, remember this, and I think you will be very successful in using this technology. What you have with you is a smart, drunk, biased, supremely confident, always available intern, right? So the smart is, it knows a lot about all kinds of different things. It's drunk in the sense it's making stuff up. So you got to check, you got to double check. It's biased because we are biased. So we can talk a little bit more about some of the research that we've been doing about the kinds of racial and other biases that emerge there. The other thing, it's always supremely confident about its answers. It never doubts itself. So you have to be the doubter in that. But it's always available, and it's this amazing intern that you can have at your side to do whatever that you want to do. So I'll pause now. I could go on and on, but I know there are other questions to get to.
Absolutely, but thanks for relating that. That I will definitely remember that. That is a hilarious sort of image to conjure up. And I relate to a lot of the things you've said about having conversations with it. And we'll dig into some of those questions from the community. But I think we'll start off before we get into like some of the benefits and some of the like concerns we've heard. Just looking at possibly TPAC or just like uh, pedagogy, just in a general sense, in what ways do you think that Gen AI, can support in the classroom? And how can the TPAC framework, or what frameworks do we have that can help teachers make informed decisions about like when and how to use generative AI?
So I think I gave a sort of answer to that by this sort of analogy of the smart, drunk, biased intern, right? Which is, you now have a helper with you. However, you have to double, triple check whatever it says, right? And not take it at face value. The challenge there is, because it is dialogic and conversational, it's multimodal, it can speak to you in different accents and languages and so on. The filters that we typically have for processing information, questioning information, being critical about it, sometimes go on the wayside. And so I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges. But otherwise, you can use it to do whatever tasks you do normally. I mean, that's not the issue as much as being careful about how you think about it. Now, coming to TPACK, I think it gets really interesting because so far, if you think about the TPACK framework, it's a framework of teacher knowledge. So you have an agent, an agentic being, someone who has agency in that space, the educator coming in, making pedagogical moves using technology. Then you have a whole bunch of learners in that space who have their own sense of agency, who have their own preferences and choices. I think for the first time in the history of human evolution, we have a technology now that, whether or not it is genuinely has agency or not, behaves in ways that it has. And that raises sort of a whole bunch of interesting questions, which I think we are just beginning to scratch the surface of. Right. So until now, if you were an educator, you ask a child to read a textbook or go online and look up a video or whatever, or some activity that they do, none of those tools would talk back to you. You know what I mean? None of those would have a conversation with you. And so now you have another creature, being, psychological creature, other in that space. How that transforms that space, I'm honestly not 100% sure of, right? Because one way of using it is that you use it to develop activities or so on that and then you come to class and you do your regular thing. But recognize the fact that these devices that we carry with us all the time have AI all over them. They've had it for a decade or more. If you use any social media tool, you are living in their algorithmic landscape. If you use photos and all of that, you've been Google Maps, name it, right? Anything that you use has AI built into it. Now it's just become more explicit and it's become one that you can now have a conversation with. And remember, it's always going to start make mistakes. I mean, Google has staked its life on being the most accurate source of like information searches. Their AI system keeps making stuff up. I mean, and it's no fault of theirs. It's this thing, technology is generative, right? And so when we think about its use in classroom, I think there can be great uses for it in terms of a partner to help you think through, to be creative in terms of ideas. I mean, to act as a practice. I mean, this is one of the best examples I've seen is like I had ChatGPT play a student who has a scientific misconception. So they think evolution, Darwinian evolution, is teleological and goal directed in nature. And I played the teacher. And it's a fascinating conversation. So I just, very simple prompt. I said, you're going to play this grade student, ninth grade student who believes teleological. I'm going to play a teacher. We're going to have a conversation, 5 rounds, and then you're going to give me feedback on how I did. And you realize how hard it is to get to identify the misconception and then to get the student to change their mind. You play this over and over again. The fact that this is generative means every conversation is different. You can ask it to take on different personalities. So these are some great ways of educators improving their practice, improving their toolkit, broadening their toolkit. But always remember that it's a smart drunk biased intern, right? And so keep that in mind, because I think it's very easy to forget that in the busyness of our lives and so on. I think yeah, I think I'll leave it at that, because I know there'll be other questions as well, and I
Yeah,
think we'll circle back to these ideas again anyway.
for sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And you know, we'll get to some of the like concerns, but right now, like we're sort of in that like people are excited, teachers are excited, they want to use it, they want to know. You just mentioned a couple of ways, and that was some of our questions that came in. So like what are some of the greatest benefits to teachers? You kind of mentioned a couple of like use cases. What do you think are there any more like benefits that you see, or use cases of this?
So the fact that this is trained on so much of human knowledge that we have created, not all of it, because only the stuff that's been digitized. So that's important to remember, because if you try to translate into, let's say, a language like Bengali, right? Because one of the things is like, it can do translation. So I can make it more accessible to children from different cultures and so on. Turns out it does really well with English. It does really well with the Romance languages. It starts fading away once we get to languages on which there hasn't been enough corpus of data. So if you translate to Bengali, and I don't know Bengali, but I talked to the grad student, they said, oh, this reads like Bengali from like 100 years ago. Not surprising, because most of the texts that have been digitized are older texts. Contemporary Bengali has not been part of its training data. And that's the same for whatever languages you can speak of, right? And so recognizing some of those, but I think the more you lean into its generative nature, the more powerful it can be. So for instance, understanding something requires us to have like different metaphors allow us to get into a topic, analogies. This thing is great with things like that. So if you ask it like, okay, can you give me like 5 examples from popular culture about the idea of entropy, it's amazing at what it comes up with. Now you don't have to take all of it, you pick the ones that work best for you. So I think metaphorical thinking, analogical thinking, approaching topics from different directions can be really powerful with these technologies, for you as an educator to explore. The fundamental challenge for learners using this technology is that educators have judgment. They know when something that it says feels wrong, and they're like, I will not use that. If you are a learner, by definition, you have not developed that judgment. And that's what's sort of problematic about this technology in some ways, is that it could completely lead you down the garden path, because these tools have also been designed to be sort of compliant to us, to please us. That's part of their design. And so so there are examples where if you say, if it gives the correct answer and you push back and you say, oh, no, 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 I think the answer is that, it will, instead of saying nope, you are wrong, it will say, oh yes, you are right, supremely confidently, you are right, that is the right answer, and then you will go on that way. And so if you're a learner, that's a huge challenge, because you have not developed those filters, those judgment sort of practices, critical skills. So I think that's going to be the sort of challenge from the learner point of view, how they interact with these technologies. And yeah, okay.
I know, that's great. I've experienced exactly what you said, where I like how you point out that it's designed to please us, and I hope if teachers are watching that they do hear and understand that, because what I also hear in that, I hear all these great advantages for creativity, but there's, like, a lot of responsibility on us as educators to understand what is going on. So another couple of questions here in this, like, realm of, like, excitement. Teachers are excited, they want to use it, but there's so much out there, right? It's exploded. So one of our community questions was, how do we keep track of all the tools as they come in and either thrive or die? And how do we, I'm like looking here, how do we
Yeah.
really keep up with all this stuff?
So I think the first thing here is, let's all take a deep breath. Seriously. You know, Technology companies gain a lot of benefit by saying this is the transformational thing, this is this is that. Yes, it is an amazing technology, don't get me wrong. I mean, anybody who's worked with it for, I remember asking you to write a poem about a mathematical proof as a poem, and the fact that it could do something like that within seconds was insane, right? So yes, it is an incredibly powerful technology, but what we do in schools, in classrooms, is something different than just a gee whiz technology, right? It is engaging with learners, getting at where they're coming from, creating context within which they can learn and thrive and grow. So yes, this technology can be helpful, but you don't have to jump into every new tool that's out there, everything that's being sold to you, because honestly, a lot of tools are being sold to you now with just AI slapped on it, right? Just the label AI slapped on it, or some version of AI slapped on it. So the questions you have to really ask yourself, and this is not just for educators or teachers, but also for people who are in the administration, to be asking, like, what am I signing away when I sign a contract with this tool, right? We know that, that the history of social media and other things is like, if something is free, then you are the thing that is being sold, it's your data, right? So in this case, when we're talking about young people, how is the data being used? Is it being used to train their systems further? Is it kept somewhere? Is it being stored somewhere, so that those companies now will have a record of that kid from grade 1 through adulthood? Like, those are very important questions to ask. Second question to ask is transparency. Like, what models are being used? Because it's so much cheaper to use, let's say, chat gpt 2.0 than the latest one. How do we know that that company which is saying, oh, we will help you create lesson plans or help you create activities or assessment rubrics or whatever, what model are they using, right? Their incentives are very strongly to go for the cheapest model, even though it might not work as well. I think those are really important questions to ask. And I think, to me, the most important thing is for educators to play with these technologies. These are really playful technologies. They really are. They can be fun. And so go to the original ones. Go to GPT, go to Claude, go to Perplexity. Those are the big models, the large language models. All the tools that you're getting, that when a company comes to your school and says we are doing X or Y, they are all going back to that. All they have done is written a series of elaborate prompts for you. That's all they've really done. They have not built a new language model. Those are finite in number because they cost a lot to build. So go to the source and work directly with the model. You will have a much better experience, not filtered by somebody else's decisions about what you should do in your classroom, right? So I think that would be, and to play with it and explore with it is something that I really recommend, because you'll get all kinds of ideas that I cannot not even list, because they'd be unique to what you need and your context.
Yeah, completely love that. And as I was listening to you kind of going through the different steps, I recalled we have an AI literacy framework at Digital Promise that is understand, use, evaluate, or essentially the three pillars there. And you kind of walked us through
Mhm.
how to do that. Play, that's my like realm of research. And I personally also have just learned from playing, but I really love how you peeled back the layer and kind of opened up that black box to say all of these tools that are out there, they are not their own AI. They're all coming from just like four primary
Five models,
sources.
five
Yeah,
models, Mistral, Llama. I mean, you can just name them literally on your fingertips. Some are open, some are not. So Llama is technically open, Mistral is completely open. You have to pay for open AI, so you just don't know what they're using at the back end. So I think that's a really important question to ask, and maybe just go to the source. There's sort of resources online to create your own prompts and so on. There's really not much need for going with some of these third party companies. Honestly, I don't think they're offering anything unique in that regard right now.
that's very interesting. Really appreciate their perspective. Sort of we have kind of like a little wrap up question in this like benefits section. And this, it's a long question, sort of digging a little deeper into TPAC, but I think the root of this question is really around collaboration.
Mhm.
And I'm not seeing AI in here, but I want to bring it back to AI. So like, you know, what this author is asking is around understanding TPAC and understanding, excuse me, teachers that may have specifically like either technology knowledge or content knowledge in different areas, and like sort of bringing them together in a sort of transdisciplinary type of project. Is there a way, I think, that like Gen AI can help with that, and either uh, fostering that, or
Mhm.
like the reflection and evaluation of doing something like that?
I love this question. I think it's a really, really important question, because one of the things that when Matt and I were sort of working on developing the framework and started doing professional development, started working with educators in higher ed and K-12, realized is that to expect every individual teacher to have all of the knowledge in their heads of technologies, of content, is actually expecting a lot. We already put a lot on our teachers, if you think about it. Whether it's government mandates or whether it's state and national standards, and then of course IEPs and this and that. I mean, the list just goes on and on. So the insight there is that we are always better together than we would ever be individually, however smart or hardworking you may be. So, thinking of TPAC not as existing in one person's head, but as a form of distributed expertise is a really powerful way to go. So, if you look at districts where the tech coordinators or the people who are sort of more well versed in that have a great relationship with the educators and genuinely listen to them, that don't come in and say here is a tool that will solve your problem. They first listen to them and they say what are the challenges you're facing. Here is an array of tools, let's discuss, let's figure out what would work best for you. You start seeing much more success. That's an example of distributed expertise where you have trust. That's the important critical glue that is needed there. But beyond that, recognizing that knowledge can be spread across individuals, and then we can collectively do something together, right? Now you think about AI and you think about the kinds of distributed expertise that comes because now you have AI in that space as well. The advantage of distributed expertise is that a tech person, for instance, gives a certain idea. the educator, the teacher in that space can say, nah, that's not going to work because my experience with these learners is the blah, blah, blah. That the challenge they face in writing is not spelling, is actually how do we conceive of an argument. That might require a different kind of tool than, let's say, Grammarly, right? So that filter becomes critically important. So if you think about AI in that space, it just becomes one more source of information in that space that has to be vetted, that has to be tested across these different people before it becomes something that you can apply in your classroom. So to me, that's actually sort of almost like the next step of the TPACK framework. When I talked about, when we talk about how does AI change the framework, is that you now have an agent there who sort of knows content, like knows pedagogical approaches, but doesn't know nuance, doesn't know, can make stuff up. That's where I think the distributed nature of thinking about expertise in that space becomes really powerful. But the judgment of the educator in that space to me is also critical.
For sure. Yeah, we are definitely better together than we are alone. And yeah, educators have a lot of power and responsibility. Um, so we have heard a lot of the exciting things. Let's dig into some of the little like icky, not so sure things that we've been hearing, that we've all been sort of talking about. So some of the questions that we have here in this realm of like some concerns, this one is really interesting because it uses this word replacement. And we've heard this, and not just in education, I think in other sectors as well. But the question is, how can AI be integrated into a classroom in ways that enhance, not replace, traditional teaching methods? And I think that replacement there is, again, something I've heard in a variety of industries.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are tech bros sitting out there making their pitches to venture capitalists saying this is the future, right? And that's sort of heartbreaking to think about. um, I think there are sort of a couple of ways that I could sort of approach these questions, right? Which is, first is the issue of judgment, right? And one of the things that educators do, they understand the learners beyond just their knowledge of content,
Mhm.
right? Now, one of the big argument that is being made for these systems is that, oh, it'll personalize learning, it's personalized learning. And we can go into the whole history of personalized learning and so on, and how it's succeeded or not over the years. But but the word personalized learning is being used in a way that to me is not genuinely personalized, because personalized would mean that it is unique to this individual, right? That it is driven by their choices. What we are seeing a lot of these tools and technologies do is take existing practices, curricula that is already out there, and say, oh, I'm going to make these micro steps for you so that you can sort of get to this end that I have decided you need to get to. That's not genuine personalization. These tools can actually help with genuine personalization. And to me, it's really sad that it's got hijacked by this one version of the term personalization. We need children to be able to solve quadratic equations. We are going to step function you through like micro steps, make it a little difficult, and then da, 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 because the system can adapt to you. That has what the definition of personalization has become, right? And so what the way I see these tools being used, it's being taking existing models of education and sort of imposing, making, entrenching those, while I think the vision for true personalization is true agency driven by the interests of the learners. For once we have a technology that can actually help with that, take some of the pressures off of educators on that, because how could you personalize learning for 30 students? Here you could, but the goals have to come from the learners, the goals have to come from the students. And I think that's sort of the challenge. And I think if we as educators step up to that, these technologies will never replace us, because they'll never be able to have that connection with the learner or the child that, this technology can help you do a lot of intermediary steps. Second thing is, going back to the whole thing of hallucinations and so on, it's inherent to its nature. So when somebody says we will get rid of hallucinations, they are wrong. In fact, the strength of the technology is that it is seeking these patterns and finding these patterns. So I think It is powerful. If you remove that, then you're going to get a really dumb piece of technology that nobody would feel like interacting with. And so that tension, I think, is an important one as well, which is, and again, the judgment of the educator comes in over there. But to be fair, there is going to be a lot of economic pressure to push these technologies into classrooms, to describe teaching as being just information transfer, to describe personalization as being this stepwise thing that we can do. There are huge financial benefits to that. It's very easy if we take those kinds of dialogues to forget and ignore why teaching is such a difficult and a beautiful job that we all do. It simplifies something which is very human and complicated. We will see a lot of pressure on that. And I think as educators, we need to sort of continuously bring back to what it is that we do and why it is important. But I think there'll be a lot of pressure there for sure. There's a lot of money to be made here, and that changes things.
Yeah, for sure. But I love your response, and I work with educators now in the capacity of being someone who sort of like leads professional development, and I don't have my own classroom anymore. And like one of my philosophies, even as a human with judgment, when I'm going to other teachers that have their own classrooms, I don't know your students. I don't know your classroom the way you do, the way that relationship you have. So I think that that's really powerful, and no machine is ever going to have that either.
Yeah, and first of all, I think, Kelly, you are underselling yourself. You do have a classroom. They just are of adults now rather than kids. That's all, right? So first of all, second, I think that's where I think the TPAC framework is really powerful, is because it doesn't make a judgment about. It doesn't tell you this is the right way of doing things. All it says is, given your context, what is the right and the content that you want to teach, what is the right mix of pedagogy and technology. Because the same, you could have one group in this room and another group in this room, the dynamics are different, you would take slightly different decisions. And I think so that's why I really like the TPAC framework, because it doesn't mandate anything. It doesn't say go do this, doesn't say this is better than that. It leaves that judgment to the educator who understands the institutional, the cultural, the social context so much better than any of us would ever do.
Yeah, absolutely. I am looking at our time and looking at our questions. I'm excited. We have a lot of questions coming in actually from the audience. So I'm sort of going over some of our pre-submitted questions. I'm going to try to I think lump a few of our next questions into
Sure.
one so that we have at 11:45, which is about 5 minutes from now, we're going to actually start going into live questions that have been submitted. But in this realm of like concerns, we hear ethics, we hear about, we've heard plagiarism and copyrights. One of the questions here that is really interesting that I want to get to, a community submitted question referring to the ethical considerations of AI agentic frameworks. So wondering if you can sort of,
So let me
you
talk a
know,
little bit about the sort of the plagiarism one, because I think that's
okay,
one, and then we can move to the agentic stuff, right?
perfect, perfect, yeah.
So plagiarism is not the issue in my mind. We got caught up in that. But the issue is that learning is hard. Like engaging with ideas. I was actually thinking of this question. I was looking up the history of math. Even something simple as like 2x plus y equals 3, that equation took humans 300 years to figure out. That we can take the 3 on the other side, it becomes minus 3, was a revelation to some of the greatest minds of their time. To expect that a 7-year-old or 8-year-old is going to get it like that, that's hard. It's hard work. The reason why we as educators are concerned about plagiarism is because it is giving an easy way out of that hard work. Why we give people exams, why we give them, is to help them struggle with that. And that, to me, that's the question we should be asking, is that where is that productive struggle going away because of the rise of Gen AI? Plagiarism is one example of it, one symptom of it. I think it's got more press than it should have. The questions we should be asking is, what is that necessary friction that learning requires? Writing a blog post for me takes me a day. It's 400 words, or 500 words, because I'm struggling with getting that right word. And one word in the beginning going wrong means then the ending doesn't work. And dang, should I change the ending? Should I change this? Is this example the right one? Can I, then I go look up something. right? It's a struggle. And I use Claude as a partner chatting with me like, Claude, how do this? I'm not getting this right. What's the right word for this? Give me 5 examples, right? So I think that the question we should be asking ourselves is not about plagiarism, but about friction, because there is necessary friction in learning to appreciate math and to understand, Newton's laws. That's one of the greatest inventions of the human mind, but that doesn't come easy. And I think ChatGPT gives us the illusion of understanding sometimes when actually we don't have that understanding. That to me is the biggest challenge that we face. All right, so that's that for that. But coming to the agentic stuff, now that's stuff that I have become obsessed with. Interestingly, back in 1999, 2000, I was doing some research on people's psychological responses to media and finding that people, even in primitive interfaces that we had back then, were responding to praise in positive ways and so on. And now we have the super powerful technologies. I've also been in this field now for more than 30 years. So I've seen the rise of the web, social media, so on and so forth. And I've come to recognize one very important thing, that it's not as much what we as educators do in the classroom with these new technologies that really matters. It's how this technologies change the world within which we live. So if you think about film and mass media, radio, there is a reason why independence movements across the world in colonial countries start at that time, because now Gandhi could give a speech sitting in Porbandar and it would be heard in the other end of Assam, right? But it is also the same reason that led to the rise of fascism and this giant entertainment cinematic complex that we have today, right? And so it's changed now with, like, there's this great quote by Edison that everybody always quotes, that the moving picture will change the classroom, and people say, haha, he got it wrong, it didn't change the classroom. Actually it did, by changing the world within which our classrooms exist. And so a huge part of my focus with AI has been on how is it going to change the world around us. And so a few things that I feel that really sort of concern me, and I really want to keep sort of beating the drum on that. One, because they're agentic, we will form parasocial relationships with them. I can see that in my case happening, even though I'm completely cognizant that there is no there. We will form these relationships, particularly critically when we are at an age where our prefrontal cortex hasn't developed. AI has a beauty bias. You ask, I mean, I've done this where I've taken a picture of myself and I ask AI ChatGPT to replicate it. It makes me this amazingly handsome guy. And I'm like, dude, Indian, make it rounder, whatever. Doesn't matter. It'll keep making me this like crazy. I'll show you those pictures. They're hilarious, right? We already live in a world where we have teenagers who have body image problems and so on. What does it mean to live in a world where the synthetic media is always going to be perfect? We already live in a world which has disinformation and misinformation and so on. So I think this agentic behavior allows it to be more persuasive, allows it to manipulate us, and we know that it'll be used to market things to us. We know it'll be used to manipulate our political views, our social views, and so on. Those are the kinds of fears that I have. And I want us as educators, yes, we have problems here now, immediate today. We have to tackle those, absolutely. What do I do in my classroom tomorrow? Absolutely. At the same time, this is where I think institutions like Digital Promise do such a great job, is asking us also to think of the long term. Like asking us, what do we do now to prevent like what happened with social media? I mean, would any of us have guessed that we would actually be having conversations in 2024 about banning cell phones in schools back in 2005 or 6, right? So I wish I had thought of that back then. So I'm saying, like, 10 years from now, I shouldn't look back and say, Punya, you didn't see some things that were coming. And so the advantage, I think, of being in the field long enough is that I can see some of these patterns and I sort of try to share them with people, and so that we can start this conversation around more of the long term and how do we inoculate ourselves today for something that is almost inevitably going to happen 5, 7, 10 years from now.
No, thank you very much. And yeah, when we get to the end, we definitely, for our audience, have a lot of resources to share about Punya's blog post. I know you have the Silver Linings podcast that you're doing with other educators, and just like a lot of like insight to like continue these conversations. I am going to switch over now with the time that we have. There's like a couple of questions that came in from the audience, so I want to make sure that we ask those live. The first question is, what role does AI play in the creative design process?
So that's the one that is of most interest to me personally, because I have done a lot of sort of research on the creative process. In fact, I'm super excited to be teaching a grad seminar next semester on AI and transdisciplinary creativity. So that's going to be fun. Again, I think my colleague Ron Beghetto often talks about it as a possibility engine. So think of generative AI as being a partner who can give you different kinds of possibilities. So you can say, hey, I'm writing something, explain this to me from the point of view of, I don't know, an American tourist in Greece or this character in a movie. You don't know what insights you will get. So if you think, this is this quote from Steve Jobs that creativity is only connecting things. It's easy for Steve Jobs to say because his brain connected those things very easily, which most people wouldn't see. I think now we have a partner who's going to give us multiple possibilities that we can then pick and run with. We don't have to. The mistake would be to take whatever it came up with and say, this is the final answer. No, it's that partnership that becomes important. I had a wonderful conversation with Claude around some visual designs. Please go to my website and read that blog post. It is actually quite fun. And so I would give it this visual design and it would be like, wow, this is brilliant. And I'm like, dude, you have no feelings. Why are you acting as if you do? It was just great. But finally, but it started giving me ideas and I could create some designs and share it back. And so it was truly a partnership there. But at the end, we came to the conclusion that Claude really didn't care what the final design was. It would act as if it did, but it really didn't care. I cared. I cared about the aesthetic of it. I cared about whether the fonts were balanced and the things were right. So anybody, whoever submitted this question, please go and find that blog post because it was a very good example for me, and also a sense of loss. I write that at the end because McLuhan says that anytime a new technology capacity comes, we lose something. And I've created 1,000 more of these kinds of visual designs. I don't even share them with anybody. They're just sitting on my computer. This was the first time I worked with an AI. And I could see that I was coming up with some new ideas, but at the same time, there was also the sense of loss. So I'm not being, it's not one or the other. I think it's going to be a complicated sort of a dynamic that will play out, and it'll play out differently for each of us. But to me, it's been an interesting sort of a thought partner. But it also, there is a sense of loss, to be fair.
Yeah, I like that balance. So possibility engine, but it's going to like everything you say because it's just a drunk intern, right?
Yep. Yeah, I have had these discussions. They're like, why do you keep it? That was a fun one where I kept telling it, you're just agreeing with me. And then it started pushing back. It said, no, I don't always agree with you. See, I'm pushing back. So funny. So funny. Oh my God.
That's great. And then our next one that we have here, it says, I share your concerns about the social impacts of AI use on our youngest learners. The analogy being the birth of social media in the early 90s. What lessons can we apply given our understanding of the impact of social media some 25 years later? You kind of talked on this, but you want to elaborate a little more?
Yes, thank you. Whoever asked this question, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. So very often we talk about media literacy in these contexts. We're like, oh, we need to give media literacy. I think that is only half the answer. I think that we need to spend a lot more trying to understanding our cognition. We have cognitive biases. This anthropomorphization is something, because we have social brains, we do. Knowing that we have confirmation bias, knowing that we have recency bias. So I think I've actually written a decent amount about it, not in a formal place, but it's sort of building the argument in my head through my blog posts. So please go take a look at that. But I think this whole thing of knowing thyself, I think is a critical piece of this puzzle. And I feel like a lot of the media literacy and AI literacy frameworks miss that point because they focus on the medium. The thing is that the answer is in the transaction between the medium and us individually, us also collectively. One can imagine a world, you know, Ted Chiang had this great quote. He said, most fears of technology are actually fears of capitalism. Because if you had a situation where teachers were paid well, teachers were respected for what they do, the thing that an AI would come along would not feel as threatening as in a situation where teachers are already under a lot of pressure and threat and financial and so on and so forth, right? And so I think those are really important things to think about. So the way I have been thinking about it is that we need to do a much better job of understanding ourselves and how we respond to the world and to media, which I don't think we are doing a good job of. The IB curriculum has this sort of theory of knowledge class, I think, in the senior year that they do, which I think is a wonderful, wonderful model for what something like this could be, except that we need to start it from kindergarten onwards. So I would do, I would ask my kids when they were watching a TV show, like, why is there a TV show? It's like, oh, because we have fun. Like, nope. The TV show is for you to watch the ads. That's why the TV show was made. That flips the equation. But that is true. It's the ads. In order to make you watch the ads, they have to make shows which you want to watch. And kids at a very early age can understand that because it's telling them something about themselves. Doesn't mean they're going to stop watching TV. No. But it does mean they have developed a filter about how to think about media, economics, culture, and so on. Right? And it's not going to happen overnight. So, yes, I love this question, but I think that my short answer is let's start spending a little bit more time understanding ourselves and building that into the curriculum.
Yeah, that's great. And we have time for, I think, just one more question before we do a little bit of a wrap up here. But we had some like we've kind of gone over the ethics and we've gone over design creativity. So the one thing I don't think we've quite touched on is what do you think, or how do you think we can tackle matters of equity and accessibility regarding Gen I and education?
So, I mean, that's a forever conundrum, right? It's a forever conundrum, especially at a time when penetration of these technologies, of like at least in cell phones and stuff like that, and AI within that is all over the place. If you think about it in terms of schools and fun, I mean, it is such a complicated problem. It's way above my pay grade to try to answer that. But I think there are some layers of things to the ethical uses of this technology that we haven't gotten to that I would like to just at least make sure that we mention because those are critically important. First, recognizing that these tools were created through unvarnished prose, a grand theft of content created by a whole variety of people in the world who were not compensated for it, who have been given a promissory note, this is going to help cure cancer or whatever it may be, and help education, whatever it may be. Let's not forget that, right? Second, that it is still being built on these reinforcement learning paradigms and so on, which are outsourced to people in the global south, where some of the most vile content that humans have come up with, these guys are filtering so that we can have a somewhat better experience. That is something we cannot forget either, right? um and so those are issues of ethics and equity as well. So it's not just that people have access to this technology, it's questions of how this technology came to be. And of course we haven't touched at all on the sort of the environmental impact of these technologies. And every time I ask a question, that's something that pings me. And again, those are broader social questions and political questions that we need to be tackling. But I think that's important to understand. Now, in terms of accessibility, I'll just say one thing. I think this is a wonderful tool for, you know, different kinds of learners who have different needs, different requirements, in terms of just taking the prose and making it easier for a fifth grade level, for so on, using, translations. Those are going to be incredibly powerful and going to be quite seamless to use over time. And I see a lot of potential there. But I think issues of access are going to still remain because, again, you are a well-resourced school. The pandemic affected you, community, a pandemic affected you less because you could form a learning pod. You could do the following, right? So any kind of a change that happens, I think the impact is differential, and I would not be surprised if it were the same in this case. And that's always going to be a challenge and something that we absolutely we should be paying attention to.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And uh, love that you mentioned environment. That wasn't something that came up, but it has. We address that in some of our
Hmm.
other sources of information. And so I'm gonna move to our closing, but thank you so much, Dr. Mishra, for being here with us. Your insights are just fantastic. I learned a ton today, and I hope that everyone in our audience did as well. And I hope that I was inspired. I hope that everyone else is inspired to go and continue looking at different resources. You can find Dr. Mishra on LinkedIn. You can find him on X. We will be dropping all of the social information there. He has a website where you can check out his blog. I think I also mentioned the podcast. Of course, he has, this is not a very academic word, but a bajillion papers, I will say, that you could go and look and read. And they're all really, I like them. I think they're great.
Thank you.
The other thing I want to mention is we have an AI education exchange. So today's Ask Me Anything is actually brought to you by HP and Digital Promise in our community, the AI Education Exchange. Please stay tuned for our next Ask Me Anything, which will be on December 12th. This one is going to be an asynchronous format, so you'll be able to submit your questions ahead of time. You will be able to submit them that day. We're going to be joined by Dr. Timothy Summers. He is an AI strategist in the field of education and cybersecurity, another fantastic colleague of mine from Arizona State University. So please register and submit your questions when the link becomes active. And I think that's it. Thank you. Thank you again so much, Dr. Mishra, for being here.
Thank you, Kelly, and the team, Jasmine, Nick, Amanda, and Rebecca, for all the work that goes into making this happen. And really, thank you to all the audience members who submitted their questions. I do reply to every email and message I get, so I might not be immediate, but I will. So, would love to hear from you. Questions, comments, thoughts. Again, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.